So welcome to already 7th lecture from the series New Interfaces, which is taking place at the Medium Gallery with the support of the Slovak Arts Council. We are very thankful for that. Today we have invited a researcher and artist, Mindaugas Gapševičius, who came from Berlin to give a lecture about the topics of his interest that he constantly studies, also during his studies in Germany at Bauhaus University in Weimar, but also in his own artistic practice. He will also react to the exhibition, which is currently on display at the Gallery of Zorka Lednarova, Cesta Mesta, so we are glad that he joined us for today, and we are curious about what he will show to us. So thank you.
Thank you, Miroslav, whatever you pronounce your name. Yeah, it's a big pleasure to be here and to show what I do, to share my thoughts with all of you, and of course I'm very glad to be part of this bigger project, the exhibition of Zorka, and somehow wanted to be not self-focused. It will happen, of course, but to have a different perspective. And the theme of my talk will also be more about the perspective of the other. And I have also this title, Experience the Other, how to experience the other, about experiencing the other. Why is so important? I think it's also related to me, my research. I was doing quite long research in my life already. All my life is research. And somehow I started doing things with computers, and then I thought, all right, so working just only with computers is a little bit limited, so I switched also to living matter. And all my research of the last, let's say, 7 to 10 years perhaps was focusing on understanding what's happening in the space, if it is a participatory event or live event. And for me it was very important to grasp a little bit more as artificial intelligence would do. So therefore I started to integrate living matter into computation and try to understand what computers or other organisms do for me, how they impact me, influence me, and how I influence them, including also machines. So therefore it is about two-direction interaction, and this is basically the focus I have. Yeah, so I also teach at Bauhaus University pretty much similar things, how to deal with living organisms and how to program if needed, how to do electronics if needed, or how to do conceptual thinking, or how to draw images if needed, because my background actually is like painting. But altogether it's, let's say, all possible media and all possible methods could be used in artistic projects. I'm an artist, so I thought, and I'm looking for, from the students of course as well, to have this kind of artistic idea first, and then a realization how this idea would be realized in the end point. If there is a need, for example, to have technology, or if there is no need to have a technology. So basically this is my background, and in this lecture I wanted to point to the problem we all deal with. And this is the exhibition of Zorka, which is all about understanding. We humans, we have different understanding to each other, right? And it's funny, with you, Miroslav, and with you, Zorka, we were talking about that, that the humans are different. right? And if you talk to each other, it doesn't really mean that you understand each other. And this exhibition you are putting up is all about understanding. So people are different, and with their abilities, disabilities, whatever, people are different. So you cannot always think of yourself. So it's better to think of someone else and to try to understand the position, your position from the other perspective. So therefore we would avoid different mistakes. So the lecture is also about obstacles, about barriers, and how to overcome those obstacles, and how to even having them to find a solution which would be sufficient to understand the environment. Basically, it is about environment. So yeah, so this exhibition, or the context of this exhibition, is very interesting, and therefore I was thinking how to relate to a historical perspective a little bit, and to sciences perhaps, and to arts. So at the beginning I have a couple of slides to put you guys into the context. And I'm not so sure if you know something about Jacob von Uexküll and Umwelt. He became kind of trendy, right, with these ecological problematics, and in arts or ecology in general. So he was referred to in many different lectures if something was happening about arts, let's say, and ecology, because this scientist, Jacob von Uexküll, was researching the environment a little bit differently. So stepping away from the standard thinking, let's say, from Darwinism, right? So what would be standard back then, like 100 years ago. And the concept he came up with, Umwelt, is very important in this context especially, right? So he introduced this idea of Umwelt into his science. He's a biologist, but on the other hand, he didn't introduce the idea of Umwelt as would be a scientific trend or scientific approach to environment. But nevertheless, he was still introducing it into his research. So here I have a couple of slides from his book, which is written here, A Stroll Through the Worlds of Animals and Men. And this is his one of a couple of books translated into English, right? So the first book he introduced the idea of Umwelt was written maybe 1920, and this was a little bit more scientific, and this one is a little bit more popular with images so people would understand a little bit better. So the idea of Umwelt is like different perspectives. So I have my thinking, my brain, and all around is my Umwelt. And I have many senses, including my sight, and hearing, and all touching, whatever, all the senses. And what is happening, I try to understand of the environment, which is happening in my head. So as I understand the environment, I kind of project my understanding to the environment, and I again try to understand the environment and again project. So it's a kind of two cycles happening. One cycle happens outside, so me in the environment, in the Umwelt, and another cycle that is happening inside my brain. So two different cycles. One cycle and another one is smaller. And this would be the idea of Umwelt, right? So this idea was introduced in this theoretical biology book, 1920, and this one is from 1932, I think. And here in this image, for example, you see a fox under the oak tree, and the fox would be using oak tree as her house, right? so to hide away. Whereas these two images, these are a little bit different. So here we have a human and oak. In one case, we have a forester measuring oak tree, so approach like a little bit scientific. And the little girl would see on the oak tree something like specific, more specific what forester wouldn't see. And she would be, a little bit frightened because, yeah, children, I guess, they would be imagining or seeing the world differently as adults, right? So these are two different perspectives from humans. And here's still a couple of more images. So one image would be from a bird in the tree. So probably hiding from someone in between flying. And then we have ant who is on the tree climbing. And then we have also another insect, whatever, beetle. So all of them, they have different environment, different perspectives, and they would understand differently. So this is still a step further as understanding between humans. But still, it is very cool to understand animals, insects, trees, plants. And this is the goal, actually, of the talk as well. I have two more scientific approaches, so to lead you a little bit more deeper into the context, what could be used for understanding weather. So microbiome, right? So all of us humans, and not necessarily humans, we have all microbiome, which helps us to understand the environment and to deal with the environment. So bacteria and fungi, like all these microorganisms thriving on our body, would be helping us to cope with the environment. So referring briefly again to the title of the talk, interfaces. So imagine that microbiome could be also understood as a interface. It is, by the way, happening also in reality. So if you have ever been drinking antibiotica, probably your perception of the environment would be different as without drinking antibiotica. All right? If you have questions, so go ahead, immediately ask, because I'm not so sure what you understand, what you don't understand, but still we can try to socialize. Another scientific idea you probably don't know, but maybe some of you know, it depends what your background is, but it's also kind of a fresh, pretty new scientific concept about mycelia networks. These are fungi, like roots of mushrooms, mycelia, all around they are in the soil. And this network of mycelia would be used for plants, for communication. So imagine now plants and mycelia, they are kind of different sorts. Like humans would be different from plants. So mycelia is also different from plants. And still plants are being able to use mycelia networks for communication. Communication in this case would mean something like exchange of nutrients, so like different salts, but also it would be used to exchange of special signals, electromagnetic signals, I guess, because the mycelia network would be also used as a channelizing information. So not only chemical compounds, but also, I guess, electromagnetic waves. So if you imagine now having a big forest, so imagine on one side of the forest animals would start eating plants, like oak trees, for example, right? And they could continue eating them until the forest would be completely eaten. But it never happens because those plants who are being eaten, they transport chemical compounds through mycelial networks to other trees or signals. So these other trees would start generating or producing those compounds which would not be attractive or not so delicious for animals. So those animals would not continue eating the forest. These are kind of scientific things, and it's based on scientific research. So allelopathy, a kind of term to communicate between different species. So mycelial network would be used for communication between different plants. All right. So that's sort of a kind of background. And now I have a short introduction to the movie about, video to, okay, so I still have here a couple of artistic projects for even more broad understanding. In this case, we have Laurie Anderson and her piece called Hand Phone Table. I don't remember it exactly how it functions, but if I remember it well, if two people sit down next to the table, so they need to put the hands on the table and cover their ears. And if two people sit, they start hearing some sound, music. I think it was music. It's just because wires below the table are interconnected, and in case of humans, the bones would be used to transport the signal, electromagnetic signal. One could hear very well if, let's say, you would put your hands on the speaker. You would be able to hear the sound of a speaker, right? Something what comes up. So it would be also bones used as a transport of information. Or imagine something, you go to the doctor, and doctor would put something on your belly, on your heart, and they would listen what's happening inside, right? So you, as a human, you wouldn't be able to perceive yourself unless you would be using some kind of tools, additional tools. Try to put some kind of tube into your ear. It's very cool, it's very interesting to hear what's happening inside of your body. So it's very cool, also artistic project. Another artistic project is a goat man. It's also very cool, from Thomas Thwaites. So he was pretending himself being a goat. He had to walk like a goat and eat like a goat and a little bit visually look like as a goat, so he would be perceived from other goats as a goat, fellow goat. He succeeded. In a way, he did also research, semi-scientifically research, referred to some papers. Of course, he would still be human, but I think a step further towards understanding being a goat, which is very cool. And one more piece, or two pieces, probably you know, Piss Christ of Serrano, Andrea Serrano. It's a very interesting piece. It's a photo. Right, and so it's different kind of period of time, middle of 20th century or second half of 20th century, but the idea is to use an image as a interface between a god and a human. So this is a kind of intermediary object to interconnect with a God, right? Who is a God? Nobody knows, but let's say something what we don't really understand, and kind of an object which is like a picture could be used to interconnect with a God. For me, it is a kind of interface as well. Different positions, both of them for the same reason, interconnect to the God. So yeah, so now I'm coming into this short video introduction to the piece. I have been working last year, so maybe I will let it play and then I will continue with my other pieces. So that would be interconnecting maybe the theoretical part and this practical part. So this is an interface for my dog, and then in the video you will see interfaces for myself. And I use electrical signals to communicate between the two. Behind me we see my piece interfaces for Boris and Mindaugas, where Boris is the name of my dog and Mindaugas is my name. The idea of the work behind is interspecies communication, where communication is happening with the means of electrical signal as an alternative to communication, alternative to only human voice and the dog voice in this case. Tutorial how to connect cables is visible on the 3D tutorials. I will try to demonstrate. Perhaps it will be more clear how to put the interfaces on. So usually I would connect the buttons and will put the interface on myself and finish connecting my buttons. This one is for the head. Same. Connecting the buttons and attaching electrodes on the head. The electrodes are here inside the interface. There is also an interface for the hand, which needs to be connected also like this. And here we also have buttons which need to be connected. These interfaces are for the dog. Same, you would put the interfaces on the dog and connect the buttons to each other. How to connect the buttons, we can take a look always on the 3D tutorials. So this is I can zoom and see how the cables are connected with each other. The idea behind is to overgo the importance of humanity and to start understanding the other, in this case the pet, much better as we understand it. You have an app and you would connect them to different dogs running around, or could be humans, it depends what kind of interfaces you would have, but the interfaces would either scan brain activity or heartbeat rate, or yeah, I guess these are two, heartbeat and kind of brain activity, and then the interfaces would change it to electricity. So as it is being changed to electricity, so scanning like on the dog side, on my side it would be converted to electricity, and electricity would be passed either through my skull, through my brain, or through my hand. So these are two different possibilities to send electricity, and as electricity is being sent through the body, you would feel a little bit of kind of heat. So you would see, okay, so if the heat goes through left side, my dog is active. Or if the heat would pass through the right side of my hand, the meaning would be, okay, so the dog is sleeping or not that active. So basically, this kind of piece was translating two kind of activities, passive and active, of the dog. And dog would be able to feel, I hope, myself, me. So this is how it would function. Right, so this was a kind of introduction to what I would think of being as an interface between two different agents, me and dog. It could be me and environment, it could be me and human being, me and many people. And I have here three different series of my pieces, which would be approaching different perspectives and different types of interfacing between me and the other. In this case, I have a project You and I, You and Me, and here I was using pretty much technological means for interfacing different actors. So for example, headwear would be interfacing different humans, same kind of idea what I was using for the dog and myself. Shoes would be reacting to the environment, and while you would be walking, you would be hearing the sound, depending on the environment you walk through. And jewelry would be interpreting your own body. So for example, imagine if your body is in a stress or you are in calm situation, so the LEDs attached to jewelry pieces would be blinking in different frequency. So technological kind of interfacing between Umwelt and myself. So the headwear pieces were looking like this, so kind of, yeah, and altogether this project is also a little bit about design and culture and how we use our clothing nowadays in reference to Middle Ages, for example, right? So this is the reference, the headwear pieces themselves would be referred to Middle Ages. If you know Bruegel or other painters from Middle Ages, that would be the source to refer to. And here you also have cables and electrodes, and while using the app, you would be able to connect to different people, depending on of whom you would like to experience. This would be the shoes. This one is for me, my size, so I'm happy to walk with them and go to some kind of parties and have my headphones and my own sound. Altogether I have 7 of those. And I'm the most proud of jewelry pieces. Altogether I have, I think, 11 of those different rings, bracelets, necklaces, and things like that. So here is the yellow LED, which would be blinking depending on the inner condition, so like stress, sleepiness, active, so it would be always a different frequency. The interesting part is here that jewelry pieces, they don't have any batteries, right? So they are charged from the skin, from the body itself. So this makes also blinking different frequency. Right. So therefore it reacts to inner condition, not to the battery, but if you are sweating, stress, also age would be very important in frequency blinking of the LED. Right. I have another series which is less technological connection, or less technology used in terms of experiencing the environment. These are different artworks which were in the collection, but I guess I can go through them quicker and just introduce the idea, what the idea was. We have here two aquariums, and they would have different yogurt, basically, right? So on the left aquarium, I think I had Lactobacillus species, and on the right aquarium I had Streptococcus thermophilus. Both of these bacteria would be thriving in dairy products, right? Lactobacillus bulgaricus, right? So one of the bacteria which would be a part of yogurt, and also Streptococcus would be part of yogurt. And the bacteria would be impacting ourselves differently. If you would use yogurt diet for like 1 week, 2 weeks, not eating anything else, so after like 10 days you would feel the environment differently, as you would feel eating meat. So that was the idea, and while eating different kind of bacteria, the perception of the environment would be still different. According to different scientific papers, I was using also different kind of bacteria. For example, this on the left aquarium, it was one of the Lactobacillus species which would be impacting our social behavior. Scientists call this bacteria love, kind of a social bacteria, because while consuming it or while having it in the body, it would let the oxytocin hormones being produced in our heads, which in turn makes us much more social. Whereas the other Streptococcus would be digesting dairy products much better. So if you digest more Streptococcus yogurt with Streptococcus bacteria, it would be easier for you to cope with sugars, milk sugars, lactose, right? Here on the right I have same bacteria at the beginning of the exhibition and at the end of the exhibition. So 10 days it was taking to become from milk to kind of this cottage cheese looking like thing. And imagine the exhibition space would also smell like yogurt. It was very cool, I tell you. This was another piece where I used different handmade also glass pieces, and blown glass pieces, and in each glass vessel I would have different bacteria. So what I did during the project was isolating different bacteria from yogurt, from kombucha, from sauerkraut, also getting bacteria in pharmacy stores or on eBay. It's possible to buy, right? Like probiotica. And the idea of this piece was that all workshop participants would be doing their own yogurt at the beginning of the exhibition, consuming this yogurt during the exhibition, and reflecting the perception after the exhibition. It didn't happen this way because during pandemic, this work was developed during pandemic, so people were sitting at home and not socializing enough. But yeah, the idea is like, okay, you could consume different bacteria depending on what you want to experience in real life. Interface as well between the environment and ourselves. So bacteria would be thriving inside of the body, microbiome, right? Another piece was with kombucha, a little bit less scientific. It was more homemade kind of style kombucha. You would add different ingredients to kombucha. People were tasting it during the closing of the exhibition. It was allowed already to take part in the exhibition. Yeah, so interesting is that the yogurt would taste also differently depending on the bacteria. So for example, if you isolate bacteria from kombucha and introduce into the milk, yogurt would be of different taste. Some of them, yeah, very unusual taste. You need to consume more in order to be able to cope with the taste because it's different taste. It's also a little bit of critique to our production lines because in our stores, industry would be providing only two types of yogurt, like Greek yogurt and Bifido yogurt, if you are aware of these kind of meanings. So these are different compositions of bacteria, but only two sorts, right? Whereas at home, it's possible to do as many sorts of yogurt as your heart wishes. And yeah, so another kind of interface, this was a rectal candle to put into the rectum, and it would be measuring the pH value of the microbiome. This is a kind of tutorial, I show how to put into the rectum. And then the data would be provided on the cell phone. So basically the data is transmitted through the Wi-Fi. And the third collection of pieces, basically, what I wanted to introduce. So the first collection was technological, the second was microbiome, so like living matter as an interface. And in this case, it would be social activity, so participatory events, basically using different tools. People would be talking to each other, but while talking you try to, or not necessarily try to, but you understand the environment also differently as you would be understanding it yourself, because communication, socializing is very, very important. I had 4 different toolkits developed, and each toolkit would be having different tools depending on the needs or of the ideas being developed in participatory activities like workshops. So for example, my collaboration with bacteria for paper production would be introducing how to isolate bacteria from yogurt, from soil, from kombucha, and how to do interesting things with one bacteria, how to grow colonies of bacteria. I sometimes invite people to do, for example, time-lapse loop and time-lapse photography, not time-lapse loop, but time-lapse photography, because as bacterial colonies grow, it would take more time. So for example, this one image here, so these colonies were growing, I think it took like 20 hours to grow from, or maybe even more, from one single bacteria. And these are two different bacteria here and here. And imagine if you have time-lapse photography, so these colonies would be growing and interacting at some point to each other. And here, if you see, it is not that well visible maybe, but it's a little bit darker space, so these are a little bit less bacteria on that part, and concentration would be a little bit aside. So two different colonies of bacteria would be interacting in this space, and they would be dealing fine. So they are not eating each other, right? So usually they would be dealing with other organisms in this space, kind of friendly. And they start, let's say, invading our territory if they are already a little bit older, or other organisms would start occupying the space and consuming the outdated or older living organisms. It's very interesting to work with time-lapse photography, by the way. Another toolkit I had was for interconnecting living organisms. So sometimes I would work for sound pieces or performative activities. And in this case, in the photo on the right, I have a performance in the woods with Martin House, another artist. We would be interconnecting different plants and mycelia, for example, or whatever is active in the soil to computers. And these toolkits provided by me would be enabling to do interconnect different tools and to use a computer to hack the networks of living organisms in terms of making a feedback loop between plants or other organisms and computer, because it allows to send electricity through the plants and then scan the activity of the plant again. I have a couple of excerpts here as a sound, so you could imagine a little bit how it sounds. Kind of noise, but this is a performance, right? So one of the outputs could be also sound, which could impact again plants, and they would be pretty much stressful being with this kind of sound. If you would track the activity of the plants, you would notice that they are a little bit stressed. Another setting with different toolkit, the setting is providing tools to capture electrical signals from living organisms, including humans. And with that, it's possible also to come up with some kind of performances or performative settings. I have here a setting with all participants of a workshop doing one sound piece. So while using heat, you could produce some kind of electricity, tiny electrical signals which would be converted to sound, and people could hear through the earplugs. And in a circle we were connecting different people, so you have two earplugs and you would connect to another person and into the circle, so the sound would be traveling a little bit around the circle, and it would be possible in a way to understand or imagine the other person. activity. I have a little bit of noise here as well, so the outcome of the performance. Again, the toolkit I was showing for interconnecting plants and machines. So here was a workshop setting, and one of the students would try to connect plant and mushroom. And then she was outputting the scanned, sensed activities of those both living organisms into the data and visualization, which was looking quite different. Not so sure if I have video, but if I have, so it's possible to see, yeah, a little bit. So this is in real time, at the same time, scanning two different living organisms with the same tools. So the activity of one organism and the other organism would be scaled differently. Or it would be different activity. You also if touched, right? So imagine if you are touching a plant, it will be stressed. So that's basically it. That's what I wanted to show. And this is a kind of summary of my talk. What I mean with machines and non-machines and interfaces within this context of exhibition. So basically, behind this, the idea of interface, which would be used to experience the other. So would that be another person or the Umwelt, environment, or it could also be another animal, or I don't know, whatever comes to your head. But the interface, imagine, could also be electromagnetic waves like what we have in between of us, right? Maybe you have heard about this kind of concept that, or you have felt maybe sometimes with some people you are able to be in company, talk about certain things, and sometimes not. And this is impact of activity, definitely of different bodies. And interface in this case would be also like air, right? Electromagnetic waves. So this is my small input into this exhibition. And I would be happy if you would ask something, or we can continue talking about different possible settings, about understanding each other and coping with each other.
Thank you.